The lighthouse failed. Not completely, just once. Its brilliant beam, a steady guardian against the relentless Pacific, stopped rotating for exactly 13 seconds. Every old sailor on Cliff noticed. Every lighthouse keeper noticed. Miss Eleanor noticed. Soren woke from a deep sleep, and in Capple's nightstand, the silver pocket watch vibrated. Only once, then became still. Far beyond the harbor, where the Pacific disappeared into endless fog, something moved, not quickly but patiently. A bell rang one lonely note, then another, deep and ancient, weathered by centuries. A massive silhouette slowly emerged from the mist. Its masts were broken, sails hung in ribbons. Barnacles covered the hull, seaweed draped from splintered railings. No lanterns burned, no crew could be seen, yet the enormous ship sailed without wind, without waves, without sound. Carved across its bow in faded gold lettering, almost erased by salt and time, were two names. The first had been carefully chiseled away. The second had been burned into the wood some time later, Captain Vic. A figure stood alone at the wheel, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a sea captain's coat that seemed woven from storm clouds. His tricorn hat hid most of his face. Only his beard, woven with strands of green kelp and white seashells, could be seen. One gloved hand rested upon the wheel, the other clutched an ornate brass compass. The compass needle did not point north. It pointed toward Cliff. The captain slowly looked toward the distant lighthouse. His voice sounded like waves crashing against forgotten wreckage. Home, the word drifted across the sea. I've finally found my way home. Behind him, dozens of ghostly sailors silently emerged from the fog. None had eyes. Each carried an old ship's lantern glowing with an eerie blue flame. At the vessel's bow hung a ship's bell covered in rust. Without anyone touching it, it rang once. The sound rolled across the Pacific. Every dog on the island began barking. Every gull took flight. Every lighthouse lamp flickered. And in the deepest drawer of Miss Eleanor's office, a weathered journal opened by itself. The page that had remained blank for over 200 years slowly filled with ink. Only one sentence appeared. When the ghost ship returns, the tide key will choose its keeper. Miles away, standing alone atop the lighthouse balcony, an old keeper whispered the words every child in Cliff had heard growing up, words no one had ever truly understood. Never count ships in the fog. One of them is counting you. The next morning, the ghost ship appeared in every conversation, yet no two people described the same vessel. Some said it had black sails, others insisted they were white. Some saw lanterns, others none. It sailed toward the harbor. It sailed away. The strangest part was that every witness believed they were telling the truth. At Cliff High School, the atmosphere felt different, not frightened, but distracted. Teachers paused mid-lesson. Students stared out classroom windows toward the harbor. Even Principal Hargrove interrupted morning announcements. If anyone has been visiting the docks before sunrise, he warned, please stop. He didn't have to explain why. Every student understood. Something had come in with the fog. At lunch, Kids' Corner gathered in their usual booth. Capple noticed Soren hadn't touched his food. Instead, he held one hand against his ear, listening. Maya frowned. You hear them again. Soren nodded. They're louder. What? The bells. Capple looked confused. I don't hear anything. Soren swallowed. You won't. They're not ringing for you. Before anyone could ask another question, Miss Eleanor appeared carrying hot chocolate, but she wasn't smiling. She quietly placed a folded newspaper onto the table. Nobody reached for the cocoa. The front page read, Fishing boat returns without crew. Net found full. Engines still running. No signs of struggle. The boat belonged to Harold McKinney, a fisherman who had lived in Cliff for 42 years. Everyone knew Harold. Everyone liked Harold. His boat drifted into the harbor at sunrise, coffee still warm, breakfast half eaten, fishing nets completely full. Harold, gone. Naomi quietly whispered, "This feels familiar." Isaiah nodded. "Book 1. "No," Maya corrected. "It feels different." She looked toward the harbor through the cafeteria windows. The hollow one wanted memories. This, she tapped the newspaper, wants people. Miss Eleanor lowered her voice. "I need you after school. The reading room, immediately." That afternoon, rain fell harder than anyone could remember. Not ordinary rain, cold rain. The kind sailors called grave rain, arriving with ocean storms that had no clouds, soaking clothing but leaving the streets strangely dry. Old islanders quietly shut their curtains. The harbor emptied before sunset. Every fishing boat returned hours early. Inside the historical reading room, Miss Eleanor had already prepared the basement. Ancient maps covered the black cedar table. Beside them sat 3 objects: a brass ship's bell, an old compass, a leather logbook. Capple immediately noticed something. The brass bell carried the same raven symbol they had seen beneath Northgale Estate. "The relic estates," he whispered. "They're connected." Miss Eleanor smiled sadly. "Everything is." She carefully opened the logbook. Across the first page were elegant handwritten words: the DeOre Shipping Company. Captain Victor DeOre, master of the vessel Morning Star. Established 1689. Capple blinked. Morning Star. Miss Eleanor nodded. That was her real name. The ghost ship. Yes, the people of Cliff only remember Captain Vic. She turned another page. A beautiful painting filled the spread. The Morning Star looked magnificent. White sails, fresh timber, bright brass lanterns. A crew smiled proudly from the deck. Standing at the wheel, Captain Victor DeOre, nothing like the monster whispered about today. He looked kind. He wasn't always called Captain Vic. Miss Eleanor gently touched the illustration. He was one of the finest captains ever to sail the Pacific. He rescued stranded sailors. He refused slave traders passage. He delivered medicine during winter storms. He once sailed 40 miles through hurricane winds to rescue 6 lighthouse keepers. Priya smiled. So, he was a hero. Miss Eleanor nodded. The greatest Cliff ever had. Capple frowned. What happened? Miss Eleanor slowly closed the book. One decision. Silence settled across the room. The hardest decisions don't usually feel evil. They feel necessary. She unfolded another map. Unlike every map they'd seen before, this one showed shipping lanes. One route crossed directly over a small symbol shaped like a key, the Tide Key. Ethan leaned closer. Another Raven Key. Yes, the keeper divided the 13 keys among 13 guardians. The Tide Key was entrusted to Captain Victor DeOre. Naomi looked confused. So why become a ghost? Miss Eleanor quietly answered, because he broke his promise. Lightning cracked overhead. The room briefly flashed white. When darkness returned, every candle had extinguished except one. Blue. Nobody had lit it. Sorn whispered, "They're here." A slow, heavy knocking echoed from above. Not the front door, not the walls, the roof. Thump, 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 as the wet boots crossed old wooden planks. One pair, then another, then dozens. The children froze. The reading room had only one floor. Nothing existed above them except the roof. The footsteps stopped. Then a ship's bell rang, one note. Clear, deep, ancient. The brass bell resting on the table answered, without anyone touching it. Capple instinctively reached for Elias's pocket watch. The silver cover sprang open by itself. Fresh words slowly appeared beneath the glass. When the harbor bell rings 13, do not answer. The footsteps resumed, Only now they circled the building, slowly, methodically. Wet footprints began appearing across the basement floor. Nobody entered. The footprints simply formed, one after another, leading toward the staircase, each filled with seawater, tiny starfish, broken shells, strands of kelp. Ethan whispered, "Someone's upstairs." Miss Eleanor shook her head. "No, something." Suddenly, every footprint stopped. At the bottom stair, no farther, as though something waited just beyond sight. Then came a voice, warm, friendly, confident. "Miss Eleanor, it's Mayor Collins. Are you down there?" Miss Eleanor's eyes widened. She didn't answer. The voice continued, "I know you're inside. I just need to ask a few questions." Capple frowned. "Shouldn't we let him in?" "No." Every child spoke together. The voice laughed softly. "My goodness, I've lived here 20 years. You all know me." Miss Eleanor quietly whispered, "No, we know someone who sounds like you." The room became deathly still. The footsteps above resumed. Only now, there was no attempt to hide them. Heavy boots crossed the floor, back and forth, stopping directly over the children's heads. Then one final sentence drifted through the ceiling. "So, this is where the new keeper's children gather." The footsteps vanished. Silence. Nobody moved for nearly a minute. Finally, Miss Eleanor exhaled. "It knows about you." Maya looked toward Capple. "No, it knows about all of us." That evening, the 7 walked home together beneath relentless rain. Nobody wanted to separate. The harbor looked unusually dark. Even the lighthouse beam seemed weaker. Then Naomi stopped walking. "What?" She slowly raised her camera. Far beyond the docks, just inside the fog, the ghost ship floated motionless, close enough to see clearly. No one else stood nearby. No tourists, no fishermen, just the 7. Captain Vic stood at the wheel, perfectly still. He slowly lifted the brass compass. Its needle spun once, then stopped, pointing not toward Capple, not toward the lighthouse, toward Maya. Captain Vic removed his hat, and with heartbreaking sadness in his weathered voice, he called across the water, "Navigator." The children stared at Maya. She whispered, "I've never seen him before." Captain Vic lowered his head. "As I feared, you no longer remember me either." Then the morning star slowly backed into the fog, against the wind, against the tide, without turning, until ship, crew, and captain disappeared completely. Only one thing remained floating upon the dark water, a brass compass, gently bobbing in the rain, waiting, as though it wanted someone very specifically to come and claim it. The brass compass floated in the harbor as though the sea itself refused to claim it. Rain struck the water. Waves rolled beneath it, yet the compass neither drifted nor sank. It simply waited. The ghost ship had vanished. Captain Vic had disappeared into the fog, but the compass remained, perfectly still. The 7 children stood silently on the pier. No one volunteered to retrieve it, not because they were afraid of the water, because every one of them understood something now. Nothing connected to the relic mysteries was ever left behind. Everything was placed, intentionally. Ethan broke the silence. "It's bait." Naomi nodded. "Probably." Priya looked toward Maya. "But what if it's also a clue?" Capple reached into his jacket. Elias Bickerpoint's pocket watch remained open. The words inside had changed. Again. The glass slowly clouded. Fresh ink spread beneath it. "Every keeper leaves a guide. Not every guide belongs to a keeper." The words faded. The watch snapped shut. Soren quietly stared toward the harbor. "He wants us to take it." Capple asked, "Captain Vic?" Soren slowly shook his head. "No, the ship." Lightning flashed. For the briefest moment, the children saw something beneath the water. Not a fish, not seaweed, rows of pale faces, looking upward, watching them from the depths. When darkness returned, only black water remained. Maya made the decision. We don't touch it. Everyone nodded. Then the compass moved on its own, not toward shore, toward them. It slid across the surface of the water without leaving a ripple, crossed 20 feet, then 30, until it gently bumped against the wooden pier. Clink. Once. Then stopped. No one had to reach. The sea had delivered it. Maya crouched beside the dock. If this is a trap, she said, it already knows where we are. She carefully lifted the compass. The brass felt warm, not cold like the Raven keys. Warm, as though someone had been holding it moments before. The lid sprang open. Instead of a needle, a tiny ship floated inside, surrounded by swirling mist. The miniature vessel slowly rotated, then stopped, pointing, not north, toward the lighthouse. Naomi whispered, "Compasses don't do that." Ethan quietly replied, "Nothing here does." As Maya closed the compass, she heard a voice, not aloud, inside her thoughts, gentle, steady, like an old captain giving instructions during a storm. The sea remembers every promise. She gasped. Everyone turned toward her. What happened? She hesitated. I think someone just spoke to me. Miss Eleanor wasn't surprised. When the children arrived at the reading room the following morning, she examined the compass with remarkable care. Then she quietly closed every curtain in the building, locked every door. Only then did she speak. This belonged to Victor DeOre. Capple leaned forward. It talks. Miss Eleanor nodded. It always did. She smiled faintly. Victor believed no captain should ever sail alone. So he enchanted his compass? No, he prayed over it. She opened another ancient journal. A faded portrait slipped onto the table. Victor DeOre stood beside his ship. He wasn't old, perhaps 35. Broad shoulders, kind eyes, neatly trimmed beard. One hand rested upon the morning star's wheel. The other held the same brass compass. Around his neck hung a small silver key, not the tide key. Another, a family heirloom. He had a wife, Miss Eleanor continued, and 2 daughters. Every voyage, he promised, I will always find my way home. And silence filled the room. Priya quietly smiled. That's sweet. Miss Eleanor's smile disappeared. Until one day, he couldn't. The journal continued. The Morning Star had departed Cliff Harbor during the winter of 1704. Its mission seemed simple: deliver medicine, food, blankets. A terrible illness had struck a small island settlement 2 days north. The voyage should have taken 4 days. The ship never arrived, nor did it return. Weeks passed, months. Eventually, people assumed everyone aboard had perished. Capple frowned. So why become a ghost? Miss Eleanor slowly turned another page. The handwriting changed. These weren't official records anymore. They were Victor's own journal, recovered decades later. The ink looked hurried, uneven, as though written aboard a violently rocking ship. The fog has not lifted in 12 days. The compass no longer points home. The crew hears bells where no bells should ring. We follow them because there is nothing else to follow. Another page. Someone walks the deck after midnight. He leaves no footprints. He never speaks. The crew calls him the Ferryman. Capple exchanged glances with Soren. Neither spoke. The name alone chilled the room. Ethan asked quietly, "Who's the Ferryman?" Miss Eleanor answered with visible hesitation. No one knows. No records describe him. No keeper has ever spoken of him. But every 100 years, sailors begin writing the same name. She looked directly at the children. The ferryman never attacks. He simply offers another direction. Naomi frowned, so Victor followed him. Miss Eleanor nodded and made the only mistake he could never undo. The room fell silent. What mistake? He chose duty over home. She unfolded a weathered map. Victor's ship had encountered two impossible choices. One course led toward home, the other toward a sinking refugee vessel carrying over 100 passengers. The Morning Star couldn't reach both, not in time. Victor chose the refugees. He saved every single life aboard the doomed vessel. But by the time he turned toward Cliff, the fog had changed. The sea no longer recognized home. He never found Cliff again, Miss Eleanor whispered. He sailed for centuries. Nobody spoke. Finally, Capple quietly asked, "So why does everyone call him a monster?" Miss Eleanor looked toward the rain-streaked windows. They're remembering the ending. They forgot the beginning. At that exact moment, the brass compass began spinning wildly. Not the tiny ship, the entire instrument. It vibrated across the cedar table, then snapped open. The miniature ship disappeared. In its place, a tiny lighthouse now floated inside. Its beam swept slowly across swirling fog, then stopped. A single word appeared beneath it: low tide. Soren stood so suddenly his chair crashed backward. The tide flats. Everyone looked at him. The old harbor. What about it? He looked terrified. They only appear at the lowest tide. Miss Eleanor closed the compass. No, absolutely not. Maya crossed her arms. That's where the clue is, which is exactly why you're not going. Lightning flashed outside. Thunder followed immediately. Too quickly. The storm sat directly overhead. The lights flickered. The brass bell resting on the shelf rang once. No one touched it. Then the building lurched, not shook, lurched, as though struck by something enormous from below. Books crashed from shelves, maps scattered across the floor. A low horn echoed through the harbor, not a modern ship horn, an ancient foghorn, deep enough to vibrate the windows. The children ran outside. The rain had stopped. The harbor had vanished. The water was gone, not drained, gone. For nearly half a mile, the seabed stretched into the fog, black mud, sunken boats, broken docks buried beneath decades of silt, ancient anchor chains, rotting barrels, forgotten foundations of the original harbor. And there, far in the distance, resting upright on the exposed ocean floor, lay the Morning Star, perfectly intact, as though it had been waiting beneath the waves for 300 years. Its lanterns slowly ignited, one by one, a gangplank lowered by itself. Captain Vic stepped onto it, removed his hat, looked directly toward Kid's Corner. Then, in a voice filled with equal parts hope and heartbreak, called across the impossible tide, "Please, help me find my way home." No one moved, not because they were afraid, but because nothing before them made sense. The ocean was gone. Not lowered, not drained by the tide. Gone. Nearly half a mile of ancient harbor lay exposed beneath a sky the color of polished steel. The smell struck them first. Not decay, salt, old salt, the kind that clung to wooden ships, thick hemp ropes, and centuries-old timber. The smell of a harbor that had been waiting far longer than anyone realized. The Morning Star rested proudly upon the exposed seabed. She did not look wrecked. She looked waiting. Her hull was scarred but magnificent. Her masts leaned only slightly. Every brass lantern along her rails burned with a steady amber flame. She looked less like a ghost ship and more like a ship trapped between two moments in time. Captain Vic stood at the gangplank. One hand rested over his heart. The other held his weathered captain's hat. He did not call again. He simply waited. Behind Kid's Corner, Miss Eleanor's voice broke the silence. "No, Everyone turned. She had followed them outside, breathless. "You are not boarding that ship." Maya looked back toward the captain. He asked for help. Miss Eleanor's expression hardened. So did the third stall. The children exchanged uneasy glances. Capple quietly asked, "You don't think he's lying?" "I don't know," she answered honestly. "And that's exactly why you don't go." The brass compass suddenly grew warm inside Maya's jacket. She removed it. The lid sprang open by itself. The tiny lighthouse disappeared. Now a tiny gangplank stretched from the compass toward the miniature morning star. Beneath it appeared fresh words. "A captain may leave his ship. A ship never leaves its captain." The compass snapped shut. Ethan looked toward the distant vessel. "I think it's inviting us." "No," Soren whispered. "It's asking." There was a difference. Everyone felt it. The hollow one had tempted. The third stall had deceived. Captain Vic had requested. Then something changed. The wind shifted. Every lantern aboard the Morning Star extinguished simultaneously. Captain Vic slowly turned toward the stern. His posture stiffened. His hand instinctively reached for the sword hanging at his side. He wasn't looking at the children anymore. He was looking behind himself, into the fog. A deep bell rang, not from the ship, from somewhere beyond it. 1, 2, 3. The sound echoed across the exposed harbor. Soren's face turned white. "That's not the ship's bell." Capple looked at him. "Then whose is it?" Soren answered with one word. "His." The fog behind the Morning Star began moving. Not drifting, walking. The mist separated into long corridors as though an invisible road stretched across the empty seabed. Something enormous approached. Slowly, deliberately. The children couldn't see it, only its silhouette. Tall, broad, wrapped in a coat that fluttered despite the still air. In one hand, a lantern. In the other, a long staff topped with an ancient ship's bell. The bell rang again. Captain Vic lowered his head, almost in shame. Miss Eleanor whispered, "The ferryman." No one answered. No one dared. The figure stopped perhaps 100 yards behind the Morning Star, still hidden by fog. It never stepped fully into view. Its lantern glowed a pale green, unlike anything they had ever seen. The light touched the deck of the Morning Star. Immediately, ghostly sailors appeared, one after another, silent, expressionless. Each resumed whatever task they had been performing centuries before, pulling ropes, cleaning rails, adjusting sails. Not one looked at the children, not one spoke. They behaved exactly as though the voyage had never ended. Captain Vic slowly turned back toward the 7. His face looked older now, warier. "You cannot stay." His voice carried easily across the harbor. "He knows you've seen me." Maya stepped forward. "We came to help." A sad smile crossed the captain's face. "I know. I've waited a very long time for children like you." The ferryman's bell rang again. Captain Vic flinched, not from pain, from obedience. Capple noticed. "He has to answer." Miss Eleanor nodded. "The bell commands." Captain Vic reluctantly placed his hat back upon his head. "I cannot remain, but..." He reached into his coat, removing a small leather pouch. He tossed it toward shore. It landed gently in the mud before Kid's Corner. The captain spoke one final sentence. "Don't make the mistake that I did." The Morning Star slowly began fading back into the fog. The ghostly crew disappeared one by one. The lanterns extinguished. The gangplank lifted. Within moments, only Captain Vic remained visible. He looked toward Cliff one last time, then quietly whispered, "I'm sorry, Anna." The ship vanished. The harbor exploded with sound. Water rushed back, not as a wave, as though someone had simply remembered the ocean belonged there. Within seconds, the seabed disappeared beneath thousands of gallons of seawater. The Morning Star was gone. The impossible tide had ended. everything looked normal again, except the leather pouch remained in Maya's hands, perfectly dry. Back inside the reading room, the children gathered around the cedar table. Miss Eleanor carefully untied the pouch. Inside rested 3 objects: a brass officer's whistle, a folded sea chart, and a weathered letter sealed with blue wax. The seal bore the crest of the DeOre family. The envelope read, "For whoever finds me before I find home." Capple slowly unfolded the letter. The ink had faded but remained readable. "If you are reading this, then I have failed. The sea has taken more from me than storms ever could. I have not become lost because I forgot my way. I became lost because I believed saving strangers meant abandoning those waiting for me. Every captain believes sacrifice makes him noble. Sometimes it only leaves someone else waiting at the window." Silence filled the room. Even Ethan looked away. The letter continued. "If Anna still waits, tell her I turned toward home. I simply never reached it." A tear slipped down Priya's cheek. Anna was his wife. Miss Eleanor nodded. She waited every evening at the lighthouse. Naomi frowned. "The lighthouse? Why there?" Miss Eleanor smiled sadly. "Because that's where Victor always looked first when he came home." Capple unfolded the sea chart. Unlike any modern map, it showed the harbor exactly as it had appeared during low tide. Ancient docks, warehouses long since demolished, stone piers swallowed by the sea. Near the center, someone had drawn a raven. Beneath it, a simple X. Written beside the mark, 2 words, Belle Reef. Soren immediately recognized the name. "My grandfather told me about Belle Reef. I thought it was a legend." Miss Eleanor slowly looked up. It was. She paused. Until now. The brass compass suddenly sprang open again. The tiny ship sailed directly toward the X on the map, then stopped. The words beneath it changed one final time. "The tide key sleeps," where the 13th bell fell silent. Outside, far beyond the lighthouse, hidden inside a bank of thick gray fog, the ferryman stood motionless aboard a narrow black skiff. He slowly lifted the ancient bell staff. A single drop of seawater fell from it. When it struck the ocean, every compass aboard every fishing boat in Cliff spun wildly. Then all of them pointed toward Belle Reef. The ferryman never smiled, never frowned, never spoke. He simply watched the lighthouse, as if waiting for someone else to make the next move, and deep beneath the waves, something metallic shifted. A key, long forgotten, had begun to awaken. The name Belle Reef spread across Cliff before sunrise, not because anyone had spoken it, but because people had dreamed it. Old fishermen awoke muttering Belle Reef. A waitress at the Cliff BTC cafeteria wrote it absent-mindedly on 3 different order tickets. A first-grade student drew a picture of a lighthouse atop a reef that no longer existed. Even Larry Bickerpoint caught himself scribbling the words onto a sticky note during a phone call. He stared at the handwriting. Belle Reef? He crumpled the paper. He couldn't remember writing it. Across town, Capple was already awake. The silver pocket watch lay open on his desk. It hadn't moved, not a single tick. But sometime during the night, a tiny droplet of seawater had appeared beneath the crystal. Impossible. The watch had never left his room. He wiped it away. Another drop slowly formed, then another. The watch wasn't leaking. It was remembering the sea. That morning, Kids' Corner gathered before school in their usual corner of the cafeteria. Miss Eleanor was waiting. She had placed a large nautical chart across 2 tables. Unlike the one Captain Vic had left behind, this one was modern. She pointed toward the harbor. There. Nothing. Only open water. She tapped the map again. According to every modern chart, Belle Reef doesn't exist. Then she placed Victor's old chart beside it. The difference was immediate. A massive horseshoe-shaped reef stretched across the harbor entrance, large enough to wreck almost any ship. Yet on the modern map, it was gone. Ethan frowned. Reefs don't just disappear. Miss Eleanor smiled sadly. They do when the sea decides to keep them. Soren quietly unfolded another yellow document. I stayed up all night. His eyes were red from exhaustion. My grandfather kept lighthouse journals. He carefully turned brittle pages until he found one dated October 11th, 1704, exactly 1 week after the morning star vanished. He began reading aloud. "The bell has stopped. No fog should be trusted until it rings again. Captain DeOre has not returned. Anna remains atop the lighthouse. She still lights the signal every sunset, even though there is no ship left to guide." Priya quietly whispered, "She never gave up." Soren nodded. "There are more." He turned another page. The handwriting had become shakier. "Today I watched Anna ring the lighthouse bell 13 times. She says Victor promised he would always answer. The sea answered instead." The room fell silent. Capple remembered the words on the compass. "The tide key sleeps where the 13th bell fell silent." He looked toward Miss Eleanor. "The lighthouse." She shook her head. "No, the old lighthouse." Everyone looked confused. "There was another one?" Miss Eleanor smiled. "The one you know is the second lighthouse. The first stood." She tapped Victor's map. "On Bell Reef." Naomi blinked. "A lighthouse in the middle of the harbor." "Exactly." Miss Eleanor folded her hands. The original lighthouse was built directly atop the reef. It guided ships through the narrow channel, but after the morning star disappeared, the reef slowly vanished beneath the sea. The lighthouse collapsed. A new one was built on the cliffs, and eventually, people forgot there had ever been another. Capple looked thoughtful. "Forgot." Miss Eleanor nodded. The relic mysteries almost always begin there. School that day felt unusually quiet, not because students whispered, but because the harbor was visible from nearly every classroom. Every few minutes, someone looked toward the water, waiting. No one knew for what. During history class, Mr. Holloway rolled in an old television. I thought we'd do something different today. He inserted a documentary tape about Pacific Northwest maritime history. The screen flickered, static. Then, instead of the documentary, an old black and white film began playing. No title, no narrator, only grainy footage of Cliff Harbor. The teacher frowned. "I don't remember recording this." The camera slowly panned across the water. There, clear as day, stood the original lighthouse. Students leaned forward. "What?" someone whispered. Then the morning star entered the frame. Children aboard waved toward shore. Crewmen laughed. Captain Victor DeOre stood proudly at the wheel. Everything looked joyful, peaceful, until the fog rolled in. The film abruptly ended. Static returned. Mr. Holloway removed the tape. "This," he stared at the label, "is a documentary about salmon migration." Nobody laughed. After school, Kids Corner rode their bicycles toward the modern lighthouse. The keeper, Thomas Mercer, was already waiting. He looked to be in his late 60s, tall and weathered, with thick white eyebrows and hands roughened by decades of maintaining lamps and climbing stairs. He opened the heavy oak door before anyone knocked. "I've been expecting you." Capple smiled. "Miss Eleanor called?" Thomas slowly shook his head. "No, the bell did." Inside, the lighthouse smelled of polished brass, salt, and old books. Every wall displayed paintings of ships. One painting immediately caught Capple's attention. The morning star, but someone had painted another vessel behind it. Only its silhouette could be seen. Far larger, entirely black. The title plate beneath the painting read, "Unknown Vessel." Thomas noticed Capple staring. "I painted that. You saw it. Once. When?" The lighthouse keeper looked toward the sea. 47 years ago. Maya frowned. "The ghost ship." "No." Thomas's voice became unusually quiet, something following it. Everyone exchanged glances. Even Miss Eleanor hadn't mentioned another ship. Thomas climbed the spiral stairs. The children followed. At the lantern room, he unlocked a narrow cedar cabinet. Inside rested dozens of old logbooks. He selected one wrapped in blue cloth. This lighthouse has only one unwritten rule. What is it? He looked directly at Capple. If the harbor bell rings, never answer with ours. Capple frowned. Why? Thomas carefully opened the logbook. Pressed inside was an old photograph. Anna DeOre, standing atop the original lighthouse, one hand on the enormous bronze bell, the other shielding her eyes as she searched the horizon. The date written below chilled everyone. October 18th, 1704, exactly the day after Victor disappeared. Thomas quietly said, "She came every sunset for 21 years. Every evening she rang the lighthouse bell 13 times, hoping Victor would hear." Naomi wiped away a tear. Did he? Thomas looked out across the water. No. A long pause. Someone else did. Without warning, the great lighthouse lens stopped rotating. The brilliant beam froze. Every child instinctively looked toward the harbor. Far below, the sea had become perfectly smooth, like polished black glass. No waves, no wind, nothing. Then one enormous bell rang, not from the lighthouse, from beneath the water. The sound was so deep, the windows vibrated. Thomas whispered, "No." A second bell answered, then a third. The children counted together. 4, 5, 6. The harbor continued ringing. 7, 8, 9. The water began bubbling directly below the lighthouse. 10, 11, 12. Capple gripped the railing. One more. The 13th bell rang. The ocean erupted, not with water, with stone. An enormous circular reef slowly rose from beneath the harbor. Barnacle-covered rocks broke the surface after 3 centuries. At its center, leaning but still standing, rose the ruins of the original lighthouse. Its ancient bronze bell swung gently in the wind, ringing all by itself, and hanging from the broken bell rope, glowing with a soft blue light, was an ornate brass key shaped like a crashing wave, the tide key. But someone else had already reached it. Standing atop the ruined lighthouse, silhouetted against the fog, was the Ferryman. He wrapped one gloved hand around the tide key, then slowly turned his lantern toward Kid's Corner. The green flame inside flared brilliantly, and for the first time the Ferryman spoke. His voice was calm, almost kind. "Come and claim it if you remember the price." The ferryman disappeared, not in a flash, not in smoke. He simply was no longer standing there. One heartbeat, he held the tide key. The next, only the ruined lighthouse remained. The ancient bell continued to sway. Its deep tone rolled across Cliff Harbor. Then, silence. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, Ethan broke it. "So, did that actually happen?" Thomas Mercer, the lighthouse keeper, answered before anyone else. "I've waited 47 years to find out I wasn't imagining it." The reef remained above the surface. Barnacle-covered stone circled the shattered lighthouse like the walls of a forgotten castle. Water crashed against it from every direction. It looked impossibly old and impossibly real. Boats throughout the harbor had stopped moving. Fishermen simply stared. Some removed their hats. Others quietly turned their boats around and headed home. No one attempted to approach Bell Reef. Miss Eleanor looked troubled. They remember enough to fear it, but not enough to know why. Capple couldn't stop staring at the old lighthouse. Something bothered him. "It isn't broken." Everyone looked at him. "The lighthouse, it looks collapsed." Capple shook his head. "No." He pointed. "It looks cut." The others looked closer. He was right. The tower hadn't crumbled naturally. Its upper half had been sliced clean away, almost surgically, as though something unimaginably sharp had passed straight through solid stone. Thomas quietly whispered, "I've never noticed that." The brass compass grew warm once again. Maya opened it. The tiny ship had returned, but this time the miniature morning star wasn't sailing. It had dropped anchor beside the ruined lighthouse. New words appeared beneath it. The first keeper guarded the light. The second guarded the memory. The third will guard the choice. Nobody understood, yet everyone instinctively wrote the words down. They had learned from the third stall. Nothing was ever written by accident. That evening, Kids' Corner gathered once again in the reading room. The cedar table had become crowded. Victor's journal, the brass whistle, the sea charts, the compass, the pocket watch, Soren's grandfather's lighthouse journal, maps, photographs, everything pointed toward Belle Reef. Everything. Except one thing. Naomi spread dozens of photographs across the table. I've been comparing them. She arranged pictures of the harbor spanning nearly 100 years. One photograph from 1910, another from 1938. Today, she pointed carefully. Look. The children leaned closer. At first, nothing. Then Capple noticed. The lighthouse. What about it? It keeps moving. Not much, only inches. But over the decades, the modern lighthouse had slowly shifted inland, stone by stone, foundation by foundation. Impossible. Buildings didn't migrate, yet the photographs proved otherwise. The lighthouse had moved nearly 30 feet since it was first built. Miss Eleanor looked genuinely stunned. No. Thomas slowly nodded. I always wondered why every few years we repaired one side of the foundation. He looked toward the old photographs. We weren't repairing it. His voice became almost a whisper. It was walking. Everyone laughed, then stopped, because no one believed it was a joke. Capple quietly asked, "Why would a lighthouse move?" Miss Eleanor slowly answered, "To stay aligned." Aligned with what? She looked toward Belle Reef, the original light. The room fell silent. Later that night, Capple couldn't sleep. Rain tapped softly against his bedroom window. The pocket watch sat on his nightstand. Open, still. He reached for it. The moment his fingers touched the silver case, everything around him disappeared. He wasn't in his room anymore. He stood upon the deck of the Morning Star, not as a ghost, not as himself, as though he were witnessing a memory. The deck bustled with life. Crewmen laughed while coiling ropes. Someone played a fiddle near the stern. Children chased one another between barrels. Victor DeOre stood at the wheel, younger, alive, smiling. The sea sparkled beneath brilliant sunlight. It was beautiful. Captain. A sailor hurried toward Victor. The fog. Victor looked toward the horizon. A thin gray wall stretched across the ocean, completely still, unnatural. Victor's smile faded. Change course 5 degrees. The helmsman turned the wheel. Nothing happened. The ship continued sailing straight toward the fog. Hard to starboard. Still nothing. The Morning Star ignored every command. Then the ship's bell rang. No one had touched it. Every sailor froze. One elderly crewman quietly removed his cap. "We've crossed." Victor frowned. "Crossed what?" The old sailor answered, "The remembering line." Capple had never heard the phrase before. Neither had Victor. The fog swallowed the ship. Instantly, the cheerful sounds vanished. No birds, no waves, no wind, only silence. Then, footsteps. Above, exactly like those heard in Miss Eleanor's reading room. Heavy, measured, crossing the deck. Victor looked upward. There shouldn't be anyone. He stopped. The footsteps continued, but no one could be seen. A young sailor whispered, "Captain, something's climbing aboard." The memory shattered. Capple awoke in bed, breathing hard. The watch had closed itself. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains. It had all felt impossibly real. At breakfast, Larry smiled. "You look terrible." Capple laughed weakly. "Thanks. Nightmares." A little. Larry poured more coffee. You know, my grandfather used to say strange dreams mean your brain is solving puzzles. Capple looked up. What if there's someone else's memories? Larry chuckled. I'd probably eat less pizza before bed. Capple smiled, but inside, he knew. Those hadn't been dreams. Victor had shown him something. That afternoon, Kids Corner reunited before heading back to Belle Reef. Capple told them everything, every detail, the cheerful crew, the fog, the invisible footsteps, the phrase, the remembering line. The room became completely silent. Miss Eleanor slowly stood. Her face had lost all color. You heard that. Capple nodded. What is it? She walked to one of the oldest books in the reading room, leather cracked with age. She carefully turned fragile pages until she found a faded map. It showed the Pacific Ocean. Far offshore, someone had drawn a curved line stretching hundreds of miles. Written beside it, 3 words, the remembering line. Miss Eleanor barely breathed. I've searched for proof of this for 30 years. It wasn't a sailor's superstition. No. She looked directly at every member of Kids Corner. It was real. Before anyone could ask another question, every window in the reading room suddenly rattled, not from thunder, from a horn, long, low, powerful, the horn of the morning star. It echoed across the harbor. Once, twice, 3 times, Thomas Mercer burst through the front door. Out of breath, their back, everyone rushed outside. The fog rolled into Cliff Harbor faster than any storm in history. Within seconds, the lighthouse disappeared. The docks disappeared. Even the street behind them vanished into gray mist. Then, shapes emerged. Not one ship. 3. The Morning Star sailed in the center. On either side, 2 smaller ghost ships drifted silently through the harbor. Their sails were shredded, their lanterns burned green. No captain stood at either wheel, only silent crews with empty eyes. Captain Vic stood aboard the Morning Star, sword drawn, facing the other ships, not leading them, holding them back. He looked toward Kids Corner and shouted with desperate urgency, "Run!" The green lanterns aboard the 2 unknown ships flared all at once, and from somewhere deep within the fog, the ferryman's bell rang again. This time, not 13 times. Only once, because 1 was all the warning anyone was going to get. The single bell echoed across Cliff Harbor. 1 note, 1 warning. Then silence. Not ordinary silence. The kind that makes the world feel as though it has stopped breathing. Even the gulls disappeared. The wind died. Rain hung in the air without falling. For one impossible moment, time itself seemed to hesitate. Captain Vic's voice shattered it. Run! The 7 didn't question him. After everything they had survived beneath Northgale Estate, they had learned an important lesson. When someone who had battled darkness for centuries told you to run, you ran. The children sprinted away from the harbor. Behind them, the fog poured onto the streets, not drifting, flowing, like an ocean escaping its shoreline. Storefronts vanished, streetlights disappeared, entire buildings became gray silhouettes. The town was still there, but no one could see it. Capple glanced over his shoulder. The 3 ghost ships no longer floated on water. They sailed across Main Street. Their hulls passed silently over pavement. Their keels never touched the ground. It looked as though the harbor itself had followed them inland. People stopped in the middle of sidewalks. Cars pulled to the curb. Everyone stared. Yet strangely, nobody screamed. Instead, they smiled, as if they recognized the ships, as if they had been waiting for them. No, Miss Eleanor whispered, they're remembering the wrong thing. The first ghost ship slowly passed the courthouse. Its faded name became visible, the Wandering Crown. The second drifted past the post office. Its hull carried another weathered name, the Silent Tide. Neither resembled the Morning Star. Their sails were torn, their masts blackened. Every lantern burned with the same unnatural green fire as the ferryman's. Ghostly sailors lined every rail, motionless, watching. Capple noticed something terrifying. None of them had faces. Where eyes should have been, there was only fog. Captain Vic maneuvered the Morning Star between them. His crew sprang into action. Unlike the sailors aboard the other two vessels, Victor's crew looked alive, determined. Every man and woman moved with purpose, pulling ropes, turning the wheel, loading ancient signal cannons, not weapons. Signal cannons. Thomas Mercer stopped running. They're trying to block them. Miss Eleanor nodded. Victor isn't attacking, he's protecting Cliff. The Morning Star fired. A brilliant column of golden light burst from its bow instead of smoke. The light struck the silent tide. Its green lanterns flickered. Several ghostly sailors vanished instantly. The black ship recoiled, not damaged, driven back. Captain Vic looked toward Kid's corner. His expression wasn't one of victory, it was desperation. He was buying them time, nothing more. Meanwhile, inside the reading room, something else awakened. The old cedar box containing decades of Kid's Corner relics began shaking, violently. One by one, every artifact the children had collected over the years floated into the air. Sheriff's badges, compasses, buttons, photographs, pieces of broken pottery, old coins, everything. They slowly circled the room, as though responding to an invisible call. Back at the harbor, Maya suddenly stopped running. The box. Everyone turned. What? The relics. I think they're reacting. Capple looked confused. To what? The Raven keys. The pocket watch vibrated. The brass compass snapped open. Victor's whistle began softly singing. 3 relics. 3 different mysteries. All responding together. Miss Eleanor froze. 3, she whispered. Discovery. The children looked at her. The first 3 books. She caught herself. The first 3 journeys. The keeper divided knowledge. The house. The harbor. The forest. She looked toward the dark mountains beyond Cliff. They've begun talking to each other. No one fully understood, but Maya did. The mysteries aren't separate. Miss Eleanor smiled. Exactly, they're waking together. Suddenly, the ferryman appeared. Not on a ship, not in the harbor. He stood in the middle of Harbor Street, 20 feet away, still carrying the green lantern, still holding the bell staff. People walked around him as though he didn't exist. Only Kid's Corner could see him. He slowly looked at Maya, then Capple, then each child in turn. Finally, he spoke. You continue to choose. His voice remained calm, without anger, without joy, simply certain. Maya stepped forward. What are you? The ferryman tilted his head. I ferry. Who? Those. He paused. Who cannot remember where they belong? Capple frowned. Are you trying to hurt Captain Vic? No. Then why chase him? I do not chase, the ferryman answered. I collect. Soren quietly whispered, he's telling the truth. Everyone looked at him. The ferryman doesn't hunt. Soren's voice shook. He waits until someone gives up. For the first time, the ferryman smiled, barely, as the listener understands. Then he looked directly at Capple. You carry another's memory. Capple instinctively reached for Elias's pocket watch. The ferryman nodded. It was never yours. No, Capple answered firmly, but he wanted me to have it. The ferryman studied him. For several long moments, neither spoke. Finally, the ferryman gave a slight bow, a worthy answer. Then he vanished, simply gone. The moment he disappeared, the 3 ghost ships also vanished. The fog rolled backward toward the sea. Within seconds, the streets of Cliff looked perfectly normal. Cars resumed driving. People continued shopping. Children laughed. Everyone behaved as though nothing had happened, except Kid's Corner. They remembered every second. That evening, Thomas Mercer unlocked a room beneath the lighthouse that none of the children had ever seen. A spiral staircase descended beneath the cliffs, deep underground. The air grew cooler, damper, until they entered a circular stone chamber. In its center stood a massive table carved from black basalt. Across its surface, someone had engraved an intricate map, not of cliff, of the entire Pacific Northwest coastline. Tiny ravens marked 13 different locations. Only 2 glowed faintly: Northgale Estate, Bell Reef. The remaining 11 remained dark. Miss Eleanor slowly exhaled. I hoped this room was only a legend. Thomas looked equally stunned. I've worked here for 30 years. I never found it. Capple frowned. Then how did we? Thomas smiled weakly. I think it wanted to be found. At the center of the table rested a shallow, circular depression, exactly the shape of a raven key, only larger. Around its edge were ancient words carved into the stone. Miss Eleanor brushed away centuries of dust. She read them aloud. Knowledge is not given, it is remembered. Every key opens more than a door. Every choice awakens more than a guardian. Then, without warning, the brass compass floated from Maya's hands. It drifted toward the stone table, hovering above the empty depression. The tiny ship inside spun wildly. Then, the compass projected a beam of pale blue light onto the carved coastline. The light moved north, far beyond cliff, into the dense evergreen mountains. It stopped over a forgotten valley. A third raven symbol ignited. Beside it, ancient words slowly appeared. Blackwood Forest. The room fell silent. Miss Eleanor whispered the name as though she had hoped never to hear it again. Camp Blackwood. Thomas looked at her. I thought that place burned. It did. So why? She stared at the glowing map. Does it still remember? Far away, deep within an endless forest, an abandoned camp bell rang once, and beneath the roots of the oldest cedar tree, a third raven key opened its eyes. The discovery arc had just taken its next step, and somewhere in the darkness, something else had realized that Kid's Corner was coming. The map continued to glow. Northgale Estate, Bell Reef, Blackwood Forest, 3 places, 3 mysteries, 3 points connected by faint lines of blue light that slowly pulsed like a heartbeat. No one spoke. Every member of Kid's Corner instinctively understood something they hadn't before. The raven keys weren't scattered randomly. They formed a network, a chain. Each mystery was awakening the next. Miss Eleanor rested both hands on the ancient stone table. For years, I believed every relic mystery was isolated. She looked at the glowing map. I was wrong. Thomas Mercer slowly nodded. The keeper didn't build 13 prisons. He looked at the children. He built 13 guardians. Capple frowned. Then why are monsters involved? Miss Eleanor smiled sadly. Because memories can become monsters when they're forgotten. Everyone became quiet. That sentence stayed with them. Later that evening, rain finally stopped for the first time in nearly a week. The sky cleared just enough for the moon to appear. Cliff Harbor shimmered beneath silver light. It was beautiful, peaceful, almost ordinary, almost. Maya stood outside Northgale Estate. The others arrived one by one on bicycles. Capple opened the front door before anyone knocked. Larry smiled from the living room. The detective club. Maya grinned. Yes, sir. Larry laughed. Try not to save the world too late tonight. Jenny called from the kitchen, and everybody gets pied before ghost hunting. Everyone laughed. Even Soren. For a little while, they were simply 7 friends. Not heroes, not guardians, just kids. After pie, they gathered in the detached garage. The third stall looked completely normal. Fresh paint, garden tools, bicycles, storage shelves, nothing remained of the impossible doorway. Capple quietly placed one hand on the wall. Thank you. No one asked why. They all understood. Maya removed Victor's compass. It immediately pointed toward the harbor. Again, Ethan sighed. So much for a quiet night. When they reached the lighthouse, Thomas Mercer was already waiting outside. He wasn't alone. An elderly woman stood beside him. She wore a pale blue sweater despite the warm evening. Her silver hair was tied neatly behind her head. She held an old brass lantern, not lit, yet somehow it seemed to glow softly from within. Thomas smiled. "I'd like you to meet someone. This is Evelyn Cross." The woman smiled warmly. "I've been waiting a long time to meet Kid's Corner." Capple looked confused. "You know us?" She chuckled. "My grandfather helped found your club." Every child froze. She carefully opened the lantern. Inside, instead of a candle, rested dozens of folded letters, perfectly preserved, each tied with blue ribbon. "What are those?" Evelyn gently lifted one. They were written to Anna DeOre. Miss Eleanor inhaled sharply. "Impossible. No." Evelyn answered softly. "My family kept them safe." She unfolded the oldest letter. The handwriting was beautiful, strong, confident. Victor's. "My dearest Anna, the sea grows rough today, but not rough enough to keep me from returning home. Every voyage reminds me that a lighthouse is more than stone. It is hope made visible. When I see your light, I remember why I sail." Nobody spoke. "There are dozens." Evelyn smiled. "He wrote one before every voyage, but he never mailed them. He always delivered them himself." Priya quietly wiped away another tear. "So Anna never read them." "No," Evelyn answered. "Not while she lived." The lantern suddenly flickered. Its glass filled with pale golden light. No one had lit it. The folded letters gently lifted into the air, floating around the children like autumn leaves. One by one, they unfolded themselves. Victor's words drifted through the lighthouse. "Tell the girls their father loves them. The sea is beautiful today. Save me a place at supper. The roses should bloom by the time I return. I'll always find my way home." Then the voices stopped. The lantern darkened. One letter remained floating. Only one. It slowly drifted toward Capple. He caught it. The envelope was different, unopened, addressed simply, "If I never return." Miss Eleanor looked at him. "I think that one's for all of us." Capple carefully opened it. Inside, only 3 sentences. "If someone finds this, tell Anna I never stopped sailing toward home. And tell whoever comes after me, never let hope become an anchor." Silence. Thomas quietly whispered, "That's not about ships." Miss Eleanor nodded. "No, it's about grief." Suddenly, the brass compass snapped open so violently, it flew from Maya's hands. The tiny ship inside spun wildly, not toward Belle Reef, toward the lighthouse lantern. Victor's letters began circling the room faster and faster. The lantern erupted with brilliant golden light. Every window glowed. The great lighthouse beam outside suddenly doubled in brightness. Its light reached farther across the Pacific than anyone had ever seen, far beyond Belle Reef, beyond the harbor, into endless fog. Then someone answered. A single golden lantern appeared on the horizon. Not green, not ghostly, warm, human. Captain Vic slowly sailed the Morning Star into view, not close enough to reach shore, just beyond Belle Reef. He stood at the bow instead of the wheel, hat removed, looking toward the lighthouse, toward the golden beam, toward Victor's letters. For the first time since the children had met him, he smiled, not sadly, hopefully. "Anna," he whispered. His voice carried effortlessly across the water. "I can see your light." Behind him, the ghostly sailors slowly lowered their heads. Several quietly removed their caps. One elderly sailor began crying. Another crossed himself. The Morning Star did not advance. It simply floated peacefully beneath the lighthouse beam, as though every soul aboard had finally remembered what home looked like. Miss Eleanor suddenly gasped. She wasn't looking at the ship. She was looking behind it. Far beyond the morning star, another light had appeared. Green, then another. Then another. 1, 5, 10, 20. Dozens. An entire fleet of green lanterns slowly ignited within the fog. Not ships, just lights. Watching, waiting. The ferryman wasn't alone. Whatever served him, whatever had followed the morning star for centuries, had found Cliff. Captain Vic saw them too. His hopeful smile disappeared instantly. He looked directly at Kidd's Corner. His voice thundered across the sea with a command unlike any he'd given before. They found the lighthouse. You must protect the light, or no one will ever find their way home again. As the green lanterns multiplied across the horizon, the ancient bell beneath Bell Reef rang once, not as a warning this time, but as a countdown. Somewhere beneath the ruined lighthouse, hidden inside stone untouched for 300 years, the tide key began to rise. The bell beneath Bell Reef rang again, not loudly, not violently, softly, almost patiently. It was no longer warning anyone. It was calling. Every member of Kidd's Corner heard it. Not with their ears, with their hearts. Capple instinctively reached for Elias Bickerpoint's pocket watch. It had opened on its own. The hands, frozen for centuries, suddenly moved. Just 1 minute. Then stopped again. Miss Eleanor stared. It moved. Thomas nodded, only because another key has awakened. Far beyond the harbor, the green lights remained motionless. They did not advance. They did not retreat. Dozens of lanterns floated within the fog like watchful eyes, waiting, watching, patient. The ferryman had not attacked. He never had. He simply allowed people to make choices. That was somehow even more unsettling. Captain Vic stood aboard the Morning Star. He looked toward the children, then toward the ruined lighthouse at Bell Reef. Finally, he removed his captain's coat, folded it carefully, placed it upon the ship's wheel. His crew immediately looked alarmed. One old sailor stepped forward. "Captain?" Victor smiled gently. "I know." Without another word, Captain Vic stepped over the railing into the sea. Capple gasped. He jumped. "No," Miss Eleanor whispered. He crossed. Victor did not sink. The ocean beneath his feet shimmered with pale gold. He simply walked. Each step left a circle of glowing light upon the water, one after another, until he reached Bell Reef. The ghost captain climbed the ancient stone steps leading to the ruined lighthouse. The bronze bell above him swayed gently, waiting. Kidd's Corner reached the reef moments later aboard Thomas Mercer's small lighthouse boat. The crossing had been strangely calm. No waves, no wind, only silence. Even the gulls refused to fly over Bell Reef. Stepping onto the ancient stone felt different. Capple immediately noticed it. "It feels." Maya nodded. "Alive." The reef wasn't merely rock. Tiny veins of blue light ran through the stone, faint, like roots beneath skin. The entire island seemed connected to something far older than anyone had imagined. Victor stood beside the ruined bell. His weathered face looked peaceful, more peaceful than it had since the children first met him. He turned as they approached. "I have brought you here because I cannot finish this journey." Capple frowned. "Why?" Victor looked toward the sea. "Because I made my choice 300 years ago." The ghostly captain knelt beside the cracked foundation of the lighthouse. He brushed away centuries of sand and shells. Hidden beneath them, a circular stone seal appeared. At its center was a raven, surrounded by 13 empty spaces. Only one glowed, the space shaped like a wave. "The tide key," Victor whispered. "It chooses." Ethan looked around. "So where is it?" Victor slowly raised one hand, pointing not toward the lighthouse, not toward the sea, toward Capple. Everyone stared. Capple blinked. "Me?" Victor smiled. No. He slowly shifted his finger, past Capple, toward Maya. The brass compass floated from Maya's jacket. It hovered over the stone seal. The tiny ship inside disappeared. The compass itself unfolded. Its brass frame separated into dozens of intricate pieces. Slowly, beautifully, the instrument transformed, its center elongated, its outer ring twisted, until the children realized it had never been merely a compass. It had always been the tide key. It descended gently into the empty space. Click! The seal glowed brilliantly. Blue light surged through every stone on Bell Reef. The ruined lighthouse began trembling. Ancient cracks sealed themselves. Broken walls slowly rebuilt. Stone lifted from the ground. Century-old masonry returned to its proper place. The original lighthouse remembered itself. Everyone stood speechless. The lighthouse wasn't being repaired. It was restoring the memory of what it had once been. The great bronze bell above them rang once. Golden light burst across the harbor. The beam from the modern lighthouse instantly connected with the restored light atop Bell Reef. Two lights, one purpose, one guiding line. Captain Vic smiled. For the first time, the harbor remembers. Then the ferryman appeared, standing at the edge of Bell Reef, exactly where sea met stone. Green lantern in one hand, bell staff in the other, he slowly looked up at the restored lighthouse. Then he bowed to Captain Vic. Nobody expected that, least of all Victor. The ghost captain returned the bow. Neither man spoke. Yet an unmistakable respect passed between them. Capple finally gathered the courage to ask, "Why did you bow?" The ferryman answered without looking away from Victor, because he never surrendered. Victor quietly smiled. "No, I merely became lost." The ferryman nodded. "There is a difference." Miss Eleanor stepped forward. "If you aren't our enemy, who is?" For the first time, the ferryman looked uncertain. His voice dropped to little more than a whisper. "I ferry those who have already been claimed." He slowly raised the green lantern. "But I do not make the claims." Silence fell over Bell Reef. Every child understood. The ferryman wasn't the master. He served someone else. Someone they had not yet met. Someone far older. The ferryman turned toward the endless Pacific. The sea forgets nothing, but he looked back at Kid's Corner. There are things older than the sea. He vanished. Almost immediately, the green lanterns beyond the harbor disappeared, one by one, until only darkness remained. The threat had retreated, for now. Victor looked noticeably different. His ghostly form had become clearer, almost human again. Color had begun returning to his face. His crew, standing silently aboard the Morning Star, looked lighter somehow. "Freer, I owe you an explanation," Victor said. He slowly removed the silver key that had hung around his neck for over 3 centuries. "I was never meant to guard the tide key forever. I was only meant to deliver it." He placed the silver key into Capple's hand. "My family's key opens no door." Capple looked confused. "Then what does it do?" Victor smiled. "It reminds whoever carries it that every adventure is worth returning home from." The children smiled. Even Ethan looked emotional. Then the restored lighthouse bell rang 13 times, not mournfully, joyfully. Each note echoed farther than the last, across the harbor, across the island, across the Pacific, far beyond the remembering line. Deep within the forests to the north, something answered. Not a bell, a camp bell, old, rusted, hidden beneath towering cedars. One ring, then another. On the ancient map beneath the modern lighthouse, the light at Bell Reef settled into a steady glow. Northgale Estate glowed beside it. Then the third point, Blackwood Forest, flared brighter than either of them. Miss Eleanor stared at the map. Her smile slowly disappeared. No. Thomas looked at her. What? She swallowed hard. We didn't wake Blackwood. Blackwood was already awake. Far away, beneath a canopy so dense that sunlight had not touched the forest floor in generations, a weathered wooden sign creaked gently in the wind. Its faded paint became just barely readable. Welcome to Camp Blackwood, where every child has a story. Beneath the sign, fresh footprints appeared in the mud. Small footprints, barefoot, leading deeper into the trees. But none of them ever came back out. The rain had stopped. For the first time in what felt like forever, Cliff Harbor stood beneath a clear morning sky. Sunlight spilled across the Pacific. Children played near the docks. Fishing boats left the harbor. Tourists returned. To anyone passing through, it looked like an ordinary day. But everyone in Kids Corner knew something extraordinary had changed. The harbor felt lighter, as though it had taken a deep breath after holding it for 300 years. Bell Reef remained above the surface, not all of it, only enough for the restored lighthouse to stand proudly against the sea. Its stone gleamed as though it had never spent centuries beneath the waves. Each evening, both lighthouses now shone together. The modern lighthouse upon the cliffs, the original lighthouse upon the reef, 2 lights. One harbor, one promise. The people of Cliff couldn't explain why they suddenly felt safer walking near the docks. They simply did. Old fishermen once again tipped their hats toward Bell Reef before sailing. Children drew 2 lighthouses instead of 1 in school. Without understanding why, the town had begun remembering. Inside the reading room, Kids Corner gathered around the cedar table one final time. Miss Eleanor carefully placed 2 objects before them, the Raven compass, now transformed into the tide key, and the silver pocket watch. Capple frowned. It stopped leaking. Miss Eleanor smiled. It remembered what it needed to. She gently handed it back to him. Elias would have wanted you to keep it. Capple nodded. I think so too. Thomas Mercer entered carrying a rolled canvas. I found something. He spread it across the table. It was a painting, fresh. The paint still smelled faintly of linseed oil. The artist had signed only with the initials, V.D. Victor DeOre. The painting showed Cliff Harbor, both lighthouses, the morning star sailing peacefully between them, 7 children standing on Bell Reef. Above them, 13 ravens circled the sky. Only 2 carried glowing keys. The other 11 flew toward distant mountains, rivers, abandoned churches, forgotten cemeteries, caves, railroads, and forests. The journey was only beginning. On the back of the painting, Victor had written a final message. To Kids Corner, every generation believes it discovered courage. It did not. Courage is simply borrowed from those who came before us, until it is our turn to lend it to those who come next. Protect each other, protect the light, and always, always find your way home. Nobody spoke. Even Ethan quietly folded the letter with surprising care. That evening, Cliff gathered for something no one had planned. Word had somehow spread. Families filled the harbor. Boats anchored around Bell Reef. Candles lined the docks. No one knew exactly why they had come, only that it felt important. Thomas Mercer climbed the restored lighthouse. Miss Eleanor stood beside the ancient bronze bell. Larry and Jenny arrived with homemade pies. Miss Eleanor laughed. You brought pie to a ghost farewell. Jenny shrugged. Nobody should leave hungry. Everyone smiled. As sunset painted the Pacific in gold and crimson, the sea became perfectly still. Without warning, the morning star emerged, not from fog, from light. Its sails were whole. Its hull gleamed as though freshly built. The ghostly green stains were gone, the broken timbers restored. It looked exactly as it had on the day Victor first sailed from Cliff. Its crew lined the rails, no longer transparent, no longer weary. They looked alive, laughing, talking, smiling, waiting. Captain Victor DeOre stood at the bow. No tattered coat, no seaweed in his beard. Only the crisp blue captain's uniform he had once proudly worn. The burden of centuries had vanished from his face. He stepped onto Belle Reef. This time, his feet made real footprints. He walked directly to Kid's corner, removing his captain's hat. He bowed, not as a ghost, as a grateful man. "My friends," he said quietly, "you gave an old sailor something he thought the sea had taken forever." Capple smiled. "What?" Victor looked toward the harbor. "Tomorrow." Everyone became confused. Victor laughed warmly. "When you've sailed without one for 300 years, tomorrow becomes a very precious thing." He knelt before Maya, the tide key. The brass key floated gently into her hands. It no longer resembled the compass from before. Now it was unmistakably a raven key, its bow shaped like a cresting wave, and its shaft engraved with tiny ravens in flight. "It belongs to its keeper." Maya shook her head. "I'm not a keeper." Victor smiled. "Not yet." The tide key dissolved into blue light. It didn't disappear. Instead, it flowed into the ancient stone beneath Belle Reef. The lighthouse glowed softly. The key had become part of the place it protected. No one could steal it. No one could carry it away. It would awaken only when its guardian was needed again. The bronze bell rang. Once, twice. Then 13 joyful peals echoed across the Pacific. This time, every bell was answered, not by ghost ships, but by the bells of fishing boats all across the harbor. The people of Cliff smiled without knowing why. Some even wiped away tears. The town was remembering a promise it had nearly forgotten. Victor looked toward the horizon. Far away, a warm golden light appeared. Not the lighthouse, someone holding a lantern. Waiting. A woman slowly stepped from the light. She wore a simple blue dress. Her auburn hair danced gently in the sea breeze. She looked exactly like the portrait in Thomas Mercer's lighthouse, Anna DeOre. She hadn't aged, she simply smiled. Victor stopped breathing. If ghosts could. Anna, his voice cracked. For the first time in 300 years, Captain Victor DeOre couldn't find the words. Anna walked toward him, placed one hand against his weathered face. "You kept your promise." Victor shook his head. "I never came home." She smiled. "No, you never stopped trying." She gently took his hand. Behind her, 2 young women appeared. Their daughters, no longer children, no longer waiting. One carried a bouquet of white roses. The other held Victor's old captain's log. Both smiled through tears. The crew of the Morning Star quietly reunited with their own loved ones. Some laughed, some cried, some simply embraced in silence. The harbor watched, though no one but Kid's Corner truly understood what they were seeing. Victor turned one last time toward the children. "I have one final gift." He looked toward the restored lighthouse. Knowledge. The lighthouse beam flashed once, twice, then projected across the night sky. Not words, a constellation, 13 stars, each shining above a different place. Northgale Estate, Belle Reef, Blackwood Forest, an abandoned mountain fire lookout, a forgotten cemetery, an old railway tunnel, a desert mission, a frozen lake, a cave, a windswept island, a hidden valley, an ancient observatory, and one final place, still dark, still unnamed. Miss Eleanor whispered, "The 13 relics." Thomas nodded. "They were never hidden. They were waiting." Victor smiled proudly. "Every mystery you solve will make the next one possible." The Morning Star's crew returned aboard. Anna squeezed Victor's hand. Together they stepped onto the deck. No chains held the ship now. No green lanterns haunted its rails. No sorrow lingered in its wake. The ship turned toward the open Pacific. The water itself seemed to part before it. As the Morning Star sailed west, every lighthouse along the coast, some hundreds of miles away, briefly flashed in unison, a sailor's salute. One captain, finally, had found his way home. 1 week later, the 7 gathered once more at their booth in the Cliff BTC cafeteria. Miss Eleanor placed a new object inside the cedar archive box, a small brass ship's wheel. Recovered from Belle Reef after the harbor had settled, she carefully labeled it, Case number 2, the ghost ship of Cliff Harbor, solved. Capple smiled. We actually solved another one. Ethan laughed. Barely. Priya grinned. We're getting better. Soren quietly added, and so are they. Everyone knew exactly what he meant. They weren't the same children who had walked into Northgale Estate 3 months earlier. They weren't older, but they were wiser. They trusted one another more deeply. They had learned that not every ghost wanted revenge. Not every frightening figure was an enemy. And sometimes, the hardest thing to do wasn't defeating darkness. It was helping someone remember the light. As they stood to leave, Maya opened the kids' corner case journal. Under the entry for case number 2, she wrote a single sentence. Every mystery leaves behind more than answers. It leaves behind people worth remembering. She closed the journal. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed Cliff in warm amber light. The harbor was calm. The lighthouse beams crossed in the distance, and for the first time since Capple had moved to Cliff on the coast, the town felt completely at peace. Far to the north, beyond the coastline, beyond the mountains, deep within towering cedar forests, a rusty camp bell swung gently without wind. Dong, a chorus of children's laughter, drifted through the trees. Then it stopped. A faded wooden sign leaned crooked beside an overgrown trail. Welcome to Camp Blackwood, where every child has a story. Below it, someone had carved fresh words that had not been there the day before. Check-in is easy. Checking out is the mystery. The discovery arc was complete. The house remembered. The harbor remembered. Now, the forest was waiting. Share this episode if you found yourself lost in the mystery and the return to home.